My name's Ian Thomas, and today I'm going to be talking briefly about some work that I've been doing at Administrative Data Research Wales on repeat housing service use, specifically focusing within a single local authority area in Wales. So what's the relevance of looking at repeat service use? So in 2019, Welsh Government released the strategy for preventing and ending homelessness. Core to that was a goal for Wales where homelessness is rare, brief and unrepeated or non-recurrent. However, at present we only collect aggregate data on homelessness services in Wales, and so we have no way of actually monitoring progress towards these goals. So this project and this kind of analysis using individual level data linkage is a sort of way of demonstrating the use of collecting this kind of data and demonstrating how it can help us to assess our own strategic goals. This main driver for this particular project was using typologies in order to understand the temporal aspects of homelessness support, specifically the length of support and whether solutions are long-term. So in essence, whether we are actually moving towards homelessness that's brief and non-recurrent. And although this use of typologies is not unique, so it's been done in the United States, Canada, Denmark and Ireland, what is unique in this case is the approach to preventing and ending homelessness in Wales and the UK generally. So in Wales, local governments, local authorities have a legal duty to prevent and otherwise end homelessness. And this differs from other international contexts where the sort of primary mechanism for achieving these ends is through provision of funding. However, there's no legal requirement for anyone to do this work. However, funders are often require people to achieve these ends. So in international homelessness typologies, there tends to be a focus on shelter stays as the basis for those typologies. However, in my case, I'm looking at periods of support, which could include shelter stays, but could include anything. So for example, mediation with landlords. And as I've said, this study uses data from a single local government area, in this case, the City and County of Swansea. Now, I was originally provided with data on roughly 16,000 applications for support made by households to the housing team. Unfortunately, only identifiable information on the main applicant is collected from each of those households. And as is usual with data linkage studies, there was attrition because of poor matching rates. So in this case, there was a 75% matching rate. I'm also only interested in a period of time between January 2012 and December 2015. So all in all, I'm dealing with 10,000 cases that relates to roughly 7,800 applicants. I've also further simplified the analysis by creating 48 monthly observation points over the 4-year period I'm interested in, and created binary indicators for whether a person was receiving support at any time within that month. So in this piece of work, I've been exploring two ways of creating typologies. Both ultimately use cluster analysis, but the inputs to those cluster analyses are different. So the time aggregating approach is the one that's predominantly used in the literature. The time patterned approach is less commonly used. In the time patterned approach, you take those binary indicators for whether a person is receiving support, and you use those to create a sequence. You then need another measure of how different those sequences are from each other in order to undertake the cluster analysis. In the time aggregating approach, you simplify those binary indicators. So in this case, I've created a variable for the number of spells seen over the 4-year period and the total number of months of support, monthly observation windows of support seen. So yes, so each used cluster analysis, but the inputs to those analyses was different. And I'm interested in the differences that those methods highlight in the data. So in the next 4-5 slides, I'm going to go over, compare the findings from the time patterned versus the time aggregating approaches. So here are the clusters identified from the time aggregating approach, as is consistent with the application of this approach to typologizing homelessness. 3 groups were found. So you have a transient group who were seen for short periods, for usually one-off events. Chronic homeless or chronic support, again seen for only sort of one-off events, but those were protracted periods of support. And then the episodic group were seen multiple periods of time, but for relatively short periods. There were some gender differences, so whereas the transient and episodic groups were roughly equivalent to my total sample, so which was 50-50 split, male-female, the chronic support group were predominantly male, so I think it was over 60% were male. So those groups compared to the ones derived from time patterning. Again, I've tried to label them in similar ways. You have a transient group, which is similar in sort of qualitatively, but not quantitatively. So you have the transient group is 91% compared to 77% under the other method. And this is mainly because here the episodic group are absorbed into the transient group. And I think this is primarily because of the distance measurement of sequence dissimilarity that I've used. It tends to be a bit blunt. So it's it sees these people as being the same. Usefully, however, it split up the chronic group into a very chronic group, you could say, who are seen for, I think the mean number of observation periods seen was 31 months over a 48-month potential observation window period. And in addition to that, it's also identified sort of medium or, as I said, intermediate term chronic people. And the difference here is whether they were seen at the start of the observation period or the end of the observation period. And the difference between these is these intermediate people were observed for roughly, on average, 15 monthly observation periods out of the 48. In this graph, I'm trying to see if there are sort of intrinsic differences in the characteristics of these people outside of the data that I've used to create the clusters. So there do seem to be some differences. So I'm looking at the proportion of cases of support by whether a household was single person or homeless, split by the groups identified in the typologies. And what I'm seeing here is that the chronic group are predominantly single person households and they are homeless, whereas the transient group are potentially receiving more preventative work and are there's a lower proportion of single people. And that's sort of consistent between the two typologies. So in summary, a large proportion of local authority support is short-term prevention work related to one-off events. So these are the transient group. The time aggregating approach actually highlighted better or more clearly an episodic group. And this is important to my original aim, as these episodic people represent repeat periods of homelessness support. And therefore potentially instances where the statutory system is failing or is slightly inadequate in permanently resolving the issues that these people are facing. And also consistent between the typologies, there is an intensive support group, the chronic group, with this being predominantly male single person households who are homeless, which again is consistent with the international literature. So the original study done by Kuhn and Culhane, upon which all of these different cluster typologies are based or like framed around. But this intensive support may potentially be due to the more complex needs and the general sort of insufficiency of statutory services in providing support to single-person households, male single-person households. And this is something I'm going to sort of explore through further data linkage to health data in order to look at the extent of severe mental health issues and substance and alcohol misuse amongst these different support groups as a proxy for complexity, to see if that's an aggravating factor in extending the period of support. And that's the end of my presentation. I am not there, so if you have any further questions, then here is my email. Thank you.